Okay, so the Footstool Project, we can see a 3D view over here. We have mortise and tenon joint, 4 mortise and tenon joints around the bottom. Difficult to see here, but we have 4 dovetails around the top, and a cross halving joint here, and a cross halving joint above that also. The actual footstool itself is here also, so we can see it there. Take off the top with a cross halving joint here and a cross halving joint here. 4 dovetails on the top. 1, 2, 3, 4. And with 4 mortise and tenons around the sides also. Alright, so that little frame forms most of the work, and on top of that then we have a little octagon shaped piece to go in there. Start off, best place to start is with one of the sides. So if you look at the plans, we have the side piece here, and that's what it looks like when it's finished, complete. The dovetail cut out at the top and a mortise cut out there, and we have our 3 views here also. We've got a front view, top view and a side view as well. The best way to mark this out, every student will be given one long piece, and on this long piece we're going to have 2 of the legs. So we'll mark 1 leg here and 1 leg there, alright, following those measurements. So we'll start off with a ruler, pencil and tray square. If we look at the plans, we can see that the length of 1 leg is 230 millimeters. So as always, we'll have our waist. We're going to have waist on one end, waist in the middle and waist on the other end also. So start off very first, face side, face edge here, face side and face edge here, because this will be cut in half once we get the whole piece complete. We'll also put our name on both sides, and a name over on this side. Okay, we'll start off with 10 millimeters of waist. Tray square, keep it tight to the edge, and draw a line. Put ruler on that line, and the length of 1 leg is 230. Tray square, ruler, draw the line. We're going to put a gap of 10 millimeters waist in between both pieces to keep them separated apart, and then 200 millimeters over to the other side. 230 millimeters, sorry, to the other side. That will start us off with waist there and there, and there, and we have waist there also. All of those lines now need to be brought all the way around, making sure that the stock of our tray square is either on the face side or the face edge. Bring that over here. Waist all the way around those pieces. So it's our waist marked. So as I said, if we were to take this apart, how this leg needs to look. Right. We have our dovetail angle on the top, we have our mortise here. Right, the way we want to set this up is so that we have our mortise here and our mortise over here. So when we're mortising, we can sit down on the piece and cut it out. Alright, so each end is where we should be placing our angles and our mortises. We'll start off by drawing those angles. If you look at the plans, we can see from here to here is 60 millimeters from the end view, and then it's in 10 millimeters there. So we'll measure up here from one end, 60 millimeters. I'm going to lightly draw a line across all the way around. Same on this end, we'll do both pieces the same. 60 here. Just whatever. Now, each end with my ruler on the waistline, I'm going to mark in 10 millimeters there. I'm going to mark in 10 millimeters there, and that will allow me then to draw my angle here and draw my angle there, extended on past the waist. Alright, same on the other side, 10 millimeters there, 10 millimeters there, and draw my line here, draw my line here. That now will also become waist. It also needs to be done on the other side, so I'm going to measure in 10 millimeters here, 10 millimeters there with my ruler, draw those lines there. Same on the other side, 10 millimeters there, and 10 millimeters there. Here, and we'll draw marker at the waist on both of those. Next, we're going to mark the position of our square hole, or our mortise. Look at our plans. You can see here that the mortise starts from the end 75 millimeters and then 20 from there, and then it comes in 12 from both sides to get this line and this line. So we have 75 and 20 first of all. So if I go back here, I'm going to mark 75. Try square my line, and 20. Try square my line. I'm going to bring that line all the way around. That's the position of the mortise on this side. Same over here. Ruler on the line, mark 75, my tri-square, draw my line, mark 20, tri-square, and draw my line. Get those lines drawn all the way around. Now, to correctly and accurately mark our lines for the position of the mortise, we're going to use a mortise gauge. And as we can see, it's 12 from here to here, and 20 is the next measurement. Okay, we're going to work off of the face edge, so we're going to use our mortise gauge. Our mortise gauge has 2 pins on it. So we're going to bring this over to the face. And we're going to set our mortise gauge to 12 and 20. So the mortise gauge goes into the vise, and I'm going to set a distance of 20 millimeters between these pins. There. And then a gap of 12 from the stock to the first pin. So from here to here, we'll have 12, and then here to here we'll have 20. We'll tighten our mortise gauge. We'll just double check our measurements. If we're happy with those distances, we'll get our piece, we'll put it into the vise, and again, the stock of my mortise gauge will be on the face edge here, and I'm going to draw those two lines in position. Now, by using the mortise gauge for both of those, all I need to do here now is flip this over and make sure I work off of the face edge, and my positions will be exactly the same as the other side. My stock will go on the face edge, and I will draw those lines in position there. So those lines will match up perfectly with the other side. There and there. Now, same on this side, my face edge is there. I'll get my mortise gauge. Not going too heavily. There and there. Face edge is in here. And we have those lines marked in position. And that has the mortises marked correctly. The last thing that we need to mark is the top part of these pieces is the dovetail joint. Now, the fact that we haven't cut this in half yet, we will not be able to mark the angles on our dovetail joint until that's done. So all we can do for the moment is mark the size or the height of the dovetail joint, which if I look at my plans, you can see here, from there to there is 20 millimeters. We will come back to marking the dovetail after we've cut the mortises, and we can go from there. So 20 millimeters either side. Get our tri-square. Draw those lines all the way around, working off the face side and face edge. And that is the majority of the marking out of the legs. That of course will be 2 legs. 2 more legs will also be needed, as we know there's 4 legs on the entire piece. Okay, so now it's time to cut out the mortises. As we know, we have 2 mortises to cut. For the purpose of the video, we'll only cut 1. We've got 1 mortise here and 1 mortise up here. Right? And this is what it should look like when it has been cut through. A square hole all the way through the piece. The reason we've kept this piece long and 2 pieces on it is because it allows me to sit on the piece like this here to hold the piece there. So I'm sitting on the piece, holding it in place, and that allows me to work on this mortise, and then I can just flip it over and work on that mortise there. The tools we're going to use for this are a mallet and a mortise chisel. As we'll know, a mortise chisel is slightly bulkier. It's a 10mm mortise chisel. It's a square mortise chisel, wooden handle so that it won't break when we're constantly tapping it. Steel ring around the top provides extra support for that also. This mortise is 20mm wide, so the 10mm mortise we're going to work 10mm here and 10mm there, and we're going to be working from both sides. We've got a scrap piece of wood which will go under the piece so that we don't damage the desk. So I'll sit on the piece, holding it in place. I'll hold my chisel up here in a vertical position, straight down, and with our mallet we'll give that a firm tap. Moving back here a couple of millimeters, firm tap, millimeters here, firm tap, working back, chisel always vertical. go over here, firm tap, over here. Those last sides, I'll just turn that chisel around. Firm tap, sides tap. Alright, at that point, I'll bring it over to the vise, place it in the vise, 2 hands on the chisel, and we're going to just clear out the work that we've taken on that piece. Alright, we've gone about 3 or 4 millimeters deep on that mortise so far. At this point, we'll flip it over and we'll work from the other side. So again, constantly working from each side. Same over here, vertical. And straighten it up on the end. Bring it over to the vise. 2 hands on the chisel. And we clear out the mortise in that position there. Okay, we'll flip it back over and we'll continue to work in from both sides. Vise and clear it out. We will flip it over again and work our way through. That's starting to break through there. Continue with the process. Straighten out that mortise. Into the vise. Clear away all of that excess. At this point, it might need some cleaning up. Nice sharp 12mm chisel. Just to tidy up the sides, and that will bring us down for the mortise on the hole. So a small bit of cleaning up and we have our mortise made. Okay. Okay, so at this point we have the mortise cut. We're now going to look at cutting off our end waist here, jack planing down these angles here, and then cutting off the waist here, which will allow us to work on our dovetail on the top. So start off nice and simple with our bench hook. We will hold the piece in place with that. We'll get our tenon saw, hold that nice and firm into place. Draw the saw back a few times, hold it nice and firm. And cut all the way through there. Now, next we will work on these angles, and we're going to jack plane those completely down. So the best way to do that is to hold the piece at an angle there, ensuring that this line here is relatively level with the table. Keep that nice and low so that's nice and firm in place. Also, a jack plane, and we're going to go opposite with the grain. We're going to work this down. Constantly checking to make sure that my angle that I'm working down is level with the pencil line that we have there. Checking both sides. There. So we've met the line here and here. Same on this side. Set it up. Make sure our jack plane is level with the line, and we'll work our way down. There's our two angles on both sides of the piece. Okay, so at this point we're going to start working on the dovetail joint on the top. So if we were to look at the pieces, there was an original piece there. On top of that we have a dovetail angle going out to the left and to the right. And that dovetail joint will work something like this, sliding into place on the top. That goes around the top of all the parts. The angle that we have to mark here, we're going to use a sliding bevel. Okay, and we loosen that screw there, we can move this around to adjust the angle. And if we look at the plans, it says all dovetails have a slope of 1:6. So the angle is 1:6. To mark that angle, we all have templates. So a 1:6 template. This angle here is the angle that we want on our dovetail joints. It matches up with what we have there. So what we're going to do is we're going to set this sliding bevel to that angle, and we're then going to use this like a tri-square to draw the angles across the top. So the best way to set that is to bring it over to the vise and put our sliding bevel into the vise. This sliding bevel into the vise there. We can set the angle like this here. So make sure this is resting on against the stock of the sliding bevel. Hold our angle and then tighten the wing nut to hold that position. So then what we have is the required 1:6. So you can see that this is now set to a 1:6 angle. If we get our original piece, we'll see that it matches perfectly with what we have there on the original piece. So when it comes to marking that, we're at a stage now where when we have both of these mortises done, we can then go and cut off the centre of the piece, because our dovetail joint is going to go here. So first of all, I will get my bench hook, tenon saw. Hold that there. My dovetail angle across this. If I just look at my plans, there's one important measurement. So the plan view, looking down on top of the piece, we have the angle starts by measuring in 13 on this side and in 13 on that side, and that will allow us to draw our angle. So again, the device here, and I'll get my piece. Vice is a very important tool. It's like a third hand. And I'm going to get my ruler from this side. I'm going to measure in 13 with a dot, and from this side I'll do the same. So I have both of those 13s marked with those dots. I'll now get my sliding bevel tight against the wood, slide it over to my dot and bevel out the way there, flip it over, bevel out the way here. Okay, so there's my dovetail angle that I need. Alright. Okay. Now, once I have that angle done, all I now need to do is to get a tri-square and draw those lines down, straight down the piece. Here. Here. Just line a little bit there. There. And there. So what we have is our dovetail angles on the top, straight down here, straight down there, and you can see this side here way more narrow. The waist is in the centre. Right? So the cutting of that then, we're cutting out the centre. So we're going to use a tenon saw to cut straight down here and straight down here, and we're going to cut off that end waist, and we're going to use a coping saw to cut out that section there. So the next step, put the piece into the vise. I'm going to get a tenon saw. Alright, I'm holding my tenon saw at that angle, but I'm cutting straight down. So follow the lines. Straight down there, and angle this way, follow my lines. Alright, we can see straight down there, straight down there. Get my bench hook, just cut off that end waist next. And from there, we got a coping saw to cut out that middle section there. So with the coping saw, we just need to be careful that we keep our angle. Remember, our angle is there and there. Let's cut. And put the piece into the vise. I'll get my coping saw, put it into that there, and obviously I need to get my coping saw turned. If I turn that straight away it'll snap, so I've got to cut and turn. So watching that, watching both sides. We have the dovetail then cut out in position there. Okay, so next we're going to move on to the cross rails. So we've made at this stage 4 legs. Each leg has a square, mortise and a dovetail on top. Alright, so what that looks like is there's our mortise and there's our dovetail on top. The cross rails on this footstool, there's going to be 2 here, cross halving joint in the middle. The bottom ones are going to have mortise and tenon joint. On the top of the footstool there's going to be a cross halving joint in the middle with dovetails in between those. So there's actually going to be 4 cross rails. 2 of those cross rails will have a straight tenon which will allow it to fit in like this on the mortise and tenon joint, like that. And another 2 of them will have dovetail joints like this, so they will have an angle on the top which will allow them to fit into the top, which will do that one. So those dovetail angles will fit in like that there. So we'll have dovetail angles on the top and we'll have straight mortise and tenons on the bottom. So 2 of those will go across like that on each side. So it's really important to note that the difference. All of them will have a trench to allow a cross halving joint to fit into place. 2 of them are straight and 2 of them have dovetail angles. So we'll start off with the straight ones, the tenons. Again, on the full length of a piece, which will allow us to mark 2 pieces, one there and one over there. So we'll mark 2 of the straight tenon pieces. If we were to get our piece, our drawings, and look at the plan, that's what we have. That there is a 3D view of the piece with our straight tenons and our trench. And we have all our measurements. We've got a side view here and a top view there. We look at our plans. First of all, we can see the length of the piece is 280 millimeters. So, as always, we're going to have waist on each side and waist in the middle here. So, first thing we'll do, a bit closer now. First thing we'll do is put our name on both sides of the piece. And we'll also put face side and face edge on both sides of the piece. That will help to improve our accuracy when marking out. We'll measure in 10 millimeters. Get our tri-square on face edge and we'll draw our line. That's our first piece of waist. We said from the plans the length of the piece is 280, so we're going to measure across to 280 there. On it, on the waist, bring this over 10 millimeters, tri-square, line there. It's a little gap of waist in the middle, and then we're going to go 280. Whatever's left over on the other side is left over. Right there. All of those lines need to be brought all the way around with a tri-square, making sure that we keep our stock of the tri-square tight to the face side and face edge of the piece. mark our waist all the way around that piece. That is the general size of both pieces marked out, there and there. Now, next, what we're going to do is we're going to mark the position of the tenon on both sides. We can see there, the tenon is a distance of 20 millimeters from there to there, and we're going to mark those positions on the end. So with my ruler, I'll go to the waistline, I'll mark 20 here, and we'll mark 20 there. Bring that line straight across. And then we're going to bring those lines all the way around, making sure our tri-square is on either the face side or the face edge. And there. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is mark a line up here and a line up there, which will show us the positions of the tenon. It says here in the plans, the distance from there to there is 12, the distance from there to there is 20. Our mortise gauge is set from earlier when we were marking our mortise. We had already got a gap of 12 and 20 here, so the mortise gauge is the tool we're going to use. I've got a gap from here to here of 12 and here to here of 20. Right. So what we will then do is go over to the vise, put the piece into the vise, and use our mortise gauge. We've got our face edge is here, so we're going to work off at the face edge, the same side always. We're going to gauge a line across there, across the top, back down this side here. So 2 hands on the mortise gauge, and that allows us to get that drawn into place accurately. Pencil that there, pencil that there, pencil across, pencil across here. Also needs to be done on this side of the piece. Obviously we'll be cutting that in half, and that will allow us to go straight across, but for the moment all we can do here is just gauge the line in that position there. Now once we get the piece cut off, we'll gauge that line across. Note that too must be done over here on the second piece. Will be exactly the same over here, but for the purpose of demonstration we'll just mark on this side here. The waist is going to be on the outside parts, all the way around here, and we'll then go on to the cutting of this now. Well, the trench needs to come first. So what we also have on the centre of this piece is a trench that needs to be marked and cut for a cross-halving joint. So if we look at our plans here, if we go to the elevation view, from here over is 118 millimeters and the trench is 44. The depth of the trench, it tells us, is 10 millimeters. So with my ruler, I'll put that on the waistline. I'm going to measure 118, so there's 110, 15, 16, 17, 18. My tri-square on my line. I'll then get my ruler and set that there and mark 44 and draw my line. Those two lines now need to be drawn all the way around, certainly down the sides for the trench. And we'll then get our marking gauge. So our marking gauge only has one line, the marking depth of our trench. We're going to put the marking gauge into the vise, loosen the thumb screw so that can move back and forth. And we're going to set this to 10 at the top of the pin. Tighten the thumb screw, double check we have 10, and then get our piece there off of the face edge, and we'll gauge a line here off the face edge again, gauge a line there. That ring is over. We'll draw a line here and here. Our X is marked, and that's the piece fully marked out. Again, it's important to know that this work and this trench also need to be done over here as well on the piece. Now we're going to move on to the cutting of this piece. So, main tool we're going to need for the cutting of this piece is the tenon saw. So when we're cutting out one tenon, or at this point, it's probably best practice to cut the piece in half. So we're going to use our bench hook. Put the piece into the bench hook, we'll get our tenon saw, and I can now cut off this end waist. I can now extend these lines around the full side of the piece. So I'm going to get my marking gauge again. I'm going to put the piece into the vise. Extend that up there. Extend it across the end grain. And bring it back down this side here. We'll get our pencil. Just finish off those lines on the piece. And we're now ready to start cutting this. So the piece is going to go into the vise. We're going to do our vertical cuts first. Straight down there. And straight down there. It shows the cuts that we just made. We'll then get our bench hook and we'll cut off that end waist. Here. And then to cut off these two shoulders, we'll just use the vise and the tenon saw. So we're going to hold that there. That point there, and this point here. Now we're left with the tenon that we need to go into the mortise itself. Alright, now that also needs to be done on this side, but we'll move on to the trench here now in the middle. So the piece will go into the vise. We get our tenon saw. Put down each side of the trench. And we'll also put down the middle. We'll then get a 12mm and an 18mm chisel, and we'll use our mallet. As always, going back to first year, we'll work on making a hill on both sides. So we've worked the hill up that side, flip the piece over, and we'll work on the hill this side. Once we have a hill on both sides, we'll take a chisel, we'll turn it around, and we'll start working our way down on the top of that hill to get ourselves a nice flat trench. Once we get closer to the bottom, we'll put two hands on the chisel and we'll work our way down the trench to get it nice and flat. As always, we never go all the way across, we just work halfway, stop, we turn it around, and we work in from the other side to give ourselves a nice and flat trench. Us our tenon and our trench that we've done on both sides, and all together we'll have 4 of those pieces to make, or 2. Okay, so the dovetail cross rail is next. We've already looked at the tenon cross rail. As we know, the differences are that one is straight and that one there is angled like a dovetail. So very, very similar. There'll be a trench in the middle here, a trench in the middle there. With 2 pieces on one long piece. We have the waist marked and we have the position of the dovetail joint. So all we really have to show here is the position or marking that angle of the dovetail joint. That's going to go here and here. That's going to go here and here. Okay, so a couple of key measurements. One important measurement is our 13 millimeters. So from here to here is 13 millimeters, and the same there and there. So if I was, for example, to mark my dovetail on this one, I'm going to set my ruler on this line, and I'm going to mark 13 there, dot, and I'm going to mark 13 there with a dot. The same will be done on this point. So we're going to mark 13 there. We're going to mark 13 there. At that point then we're going to get our sliding bevel. As we will know from previous videos, the angle is 1:6. So we have used our 1:6 template to set our angle on our sliding bevel. And all we now need to do is use that to draw the angles out there. The best way to do that is to put the piece into the vise. Put the piece in the vise there. I have my angle. There with my 2 dots that I've marked, and I'll get my angle, my sliding bevel, hold that nice and firm, draw that line all the way up there, and I'm going to draw the line all the way up there, like so. Then get my tri-square, tri-square those positions straight across the top. Turn the piece around and bring those positions back in with the sliding bevel. That will give us a dovetail on both sides. That is all going to be waste, and that is the dovetail that we're going to end up with there. Piece. That's going to fit in, and that's what we're going to be left with there. That will need to be done on this side also, but we can only do this side when we get that cut off. So we're going to put the bench and tendon saw to cut that off. Cut that piece of waste. Now we can get our sliding bevel on our pencil here, and we can slide and bevel those angles also. We'll get our tri-square. We can work straight across the top there and there, and we'll also do the same on this side here. And that will give us our dovetails on both sides of that piece. Now, cutting of these will be next. So if we take this one for example, so if we take this one for example, we're going to set up a device and we're going to cut down here and here. We're going to cut the end waist off, and then we're going to cut off these shoulders on the sides. So when I'm setting this up on the vise, I'm going to set it up at a slight angle like that, so that my tendon saw is going to go straight down on that. Lower that slightly in the vise, just to make sure it's nice and firm, nice and steady. Hold that there. And here, flip it over, hold that at an angle, and we'll work down this side. We can then get our bench up. That will allow us to cut off our end waist. And all we have to do then is cut off this shoulder and that shoulder, and we will use the vise to cut those shoulders down. Here and here. That leaves us with our dovetail shape, just like this one here, and that will allow us to slot in to the top of that there. Okay, so the final piece of this footstool is the top that's going to rest on it. It's simply an octagon in shape that needs to be cut with a coping saw and finished off with a jack plane. But we also have this decorative feature around the top edge known as a chamfer, which we're going to mark and work down with the jack plane also. We'll be starting off this piece with a simple square of pine, and the first job we're going to have to do is mark 4 corners to cut off and build from there. These are the plans. That's what the top should look like when it's finished. The main measurement that we're looking at here is just 70 millimeters, so we're going to measure in 70 and down 70 to get our angle. And it says here all chamfers have a measurement of 8 millimeters, which we'll come to shortly. So with our square piece, all 4 corners, we're going to mark 70 across and 70 down, and simply join those corners. 70 across and 70 down to get those corners. So we mark a little dot on the edge of the piece. Same over here, 70 across 70 down, join the corners, same over here, 70 across and 70 down. Close. That there is all going to be waste, but before we go cutting we need to transfer that around to the other side. So we'll get a tri-square and we're going to transfer that there, and we'll transfer that across there, and that will allow me to get my 70mm positions and just join those with ruler. So again, we're going to tri-square across there, tri-square across there, and there. For the purposes of the video, I'm just going to do 2 of these. As you will know from the piece, there's actually 4 corners to be cut off. Okay. Now when it comes to cutting these, right, what we could do, our main options are, we could use a jack plane and jack plane the whole way down, but that would be a lot of work. So what we also have an option to do is we could get a coping saw and cut off a good lump of this, but we'll stay about 3 or 4mm off the line because the coping saw gives a fairly rough cut, and we'll jack plane down the rest of it. Okay, so get a coping saw, put the piece into the vise like so. Get my coping saw and again I'll stay a couple of millimeters off the line. And we'll lower that nice and low in the vise, or as low as we can in the vise. And watch the line. We're going to work away. Stopping and checking. Okay, that will leave us, again, if we look closely there, we're about 3 or 4mm off the line. The coping saw leaves quite a rough surface, but that will allow us to smoothen it off with the jack plane. It's important we know which direction we're going. If we go this way, we're going against the grain and it's going to pull up the wood, so it's important that we go out over the grain. Right. So my jack plane is there. Start off a little bit rough because of the rough finish from the coping saw. Eventually it'll become smooth. Checking both sides, watching my line. And we're down with a nice smooth surface on that corner there. We'll do one more of those for the purposes of demonstration. So into the vise, coping saw, a couple of millimeters from the line, a bit more level, a couple of millimeters from the line. Again, a rough finish is left there. I need to make sure I jack plane with the grain, like so. Get my jack plane. Have then a nice smooth surface on 2 of those. A little bit more work needed to get down to the line, but we're almost there with that. Okay, so the next thing we're going to mark is the chamfer around the top edge of the piece. And as we said, according to the plans, it tells us there that all chamfers have a measurement of 8mm. So the best way to mark this chamfer is to use the back of our marking gauge, and what we're going to do is we're going to set a distance on this device. I'm going to set a distance, so the pin is here on the marking gauge. I'm not going to use the pin because it'll damage the wood, right? So we're actually going to use the other end of the marking gauge. I'm going to put this into the vise, the other end, with the thumb screw facing up. And I'm going to get my ruler and I'm going to set a distance of 8 millimeters from the stock to the end of that piece, like so. So from here to here with 8 millimeters. Then what I need to do is I need to mark, if I get the original piece, a line across the top of the chamfer and a line across the bottom of the chamfer. So essentially what I'm going to have is a line all the way around the top and all the way around the edge. So for example, if I do the lines on the edge, if I put that in the vise like so, I can get my marking gauge and hold it with my hand, like so. The stock up against the wood, and my pencil is now against that wood. I have an 8 millimeter gap here, so I can now gently slide along like so. Just back a little bit. Slide along like so, along there, and then simply just rotate the piece around each time to get those lines. All the way around every edge of the piece. Gives us an 8 millimeter line all the way around. Now it's important to note that that makes, I have 8 millimeters here, so that makes this here the top. So the lines I'm going to draw around the top has to be on this side. So what we're going to do there then, to help us with it, open the vise. I want to put the piece in the vise like so. Slightly awkward job. I'll move this over here to the edge. I'm now going to do the exact same thing with the marking gauge. Hold that there and draw my lines across like so. I'll get in this corner here again. I'll keep rotating the piece around in the vise to get all of those done. Always making sure that the marking gauge is tight to the edge of the wood. There and there. What that leaves us here with essentially is so all the way around here is essentially waste. All the way around the piece. And on the edge piece also. So our waist is all the way around there. We're going to use a jack plane working at an angle to get that out. And so on. Now, when it comes to jack planing these angles, we need to take the grain into consideration and make sure that we don't go against the grain. So as we can see here, the grain on this piece of wood is going across here. Now when we go along with the grain with our jack plane, it will work perfectly smoothly. So this chamfer and this chamfer on the bottom, we can simply go in either direction. So it's important that we mark these arrows. I can go either way on that chamfer there, and I can go either way on this one here. With the grain going this way, if I jack plane up the way, I'm pulling up that grain and it's going to rip and tear. So we must go down this way on this chamfer and down this way on this chamfer. And again, I recommend you draw those arrows on the piece. Same here, if I go up that way or up that way, it's going to rip up the grain. So we must go down the way on these. Now, here and here, we're dealing with direct end grain. So if I jack plane all the way across here, it'll break off there. If I jack plane all the way across here, it'll break off there. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in halfway on both sides for these ones, which we'll demonstrate there now. So, the piece will go into the vise. We'll start with the easiest chamfer, which is with the grain. We'll do a few of these for the purpose of the video. If I have that there like so, I have my line on the top here, and my line down there. And the arrow telling me I can go both ways. Either way is fine. So with my jack plane, I'm going to hold it at an angle, like so. Strong hand on the big handle, weaker hand on the small handle. And I'm going to just jack plane at an angle. Right, and you can see I'm working down my angle, working towards this line, and working towards that line there. Once I get to those lines, we stop. And what we're trying to achieve is a nice flat surface. Next, I'll move the piece around. Again, I have my grain, my arrow going that way. So these shorter ones, we're working away there. Again, I'm watching this line and that line. Keeping my angle right. I recommend that you leave the two hardest chamfers to the end. So this one and this one we wait till the end. So for the purpose of demonstration, I'm now going to work on this one, which will allow me to get in here then. So what I'm going to do here is set that one up in the vise. Again, you can see the direction that the arrow is going. So I'm going to move my position and work from the other side to make sure I'm going that way. Down to that one. Now, that leaves us with this chamfer here. So what I need to do when I'm working on this chamfer here is with the jack plane, I'm going to work in such a way that I have it actually facing out towards me. I'm going to get a stool. Let's readjust the position of the camera. See? So I have the piece of wood facing towards me. I am working on this chamfer here. Okay. Now, with this chamfer, I need to work from both sides. So I'm going to work this way, about halfway, and when I'm using the jack plane, I'm even going to go slightly up the way. So, I'm up the way there, only getting about halfway across. I'm going to go around to the other side, halfway across there. Back to the other side. Across there, and then back to the other side. And what we're trying to achieve with our chamfers, as you can see there, we always say, is flat surfaces and straight lines. So we have a nice flat chamfer there, and a straight line between the chamfers, a straight line on the bottom and the top of the chamfer there.